I had this tool all along, filmmaking and animation, and I could have been saying something with it, as something that I needed to say as a human being, and I wasn't doing it. And then suddenly I had that thing, and I followed that ever since.
All right, this is the Story Series podcast where we tell the stories behind the people. David Levy, welcome.
Thanks, Brandon. I'm so excited to chat today. Thanks for having me.
You are currently the head of studio at Pinkfong USA, the powerhouse studio behind, of course, Baby Shark, Baby Finn. Before joining Pinkfong, you served as the director of animation at Disney+. You developed original short-form content with Pixar, Lucasfilm. You're also the author of Your Career in Animation, How to Survive and Thrive, which is in its second edition, which is a must-read guide for anyone navigating this industry. All that is to say, you've worn, I think, just about every creative hat in animation industry. So once again, welcome.
Thank you. I sound like I've done a lot when I hear that.
Yes, well, you know, we met for coffee about a month ago, and we kind of shared our backgrounds, and which was just fascinating to hear your journey in the industry. But something that was really that came to mind was how you've been able to maintain this entrepreneurial spirit across your career. That was just so fascinating to me. Does that resonate with you?
It does. And, you know, I've talked to other people about this, and I've come to think of it as a New York hustle. You know, I'm from New York. I was a fourth generation New Yorker. I'm only in LA since 2012. And there's a certain level of moxie, chutzpah, energy you have to put out in New York just to kind of get by and piece together a living, a career, and, you know, doing whatever you want to do. It's a tough place to live, and, you know, a great place to live, but it took a lot of work to kind of figure it out. And I think that just became like something I couldn't shake, even in Los Angeles. And when I meet other new expatriates, you know, from New York that are in LA and animation industry, they have that same vibe.
Kind of, yeah. What is that? A fisherman can always spot another fisherman from afar.
Yeah, and I think it's you know, the willingness to take on a lot of things, you know, side projects, or juggle a lot in your main focus, like where you work, and to kind of look at things as, you know, anything's possible, and make connections for yourself and find your own opportunities. To me, that's the pleasure I have every day when I go to work.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to just connect those dots a little bit. So going back, you were born and raised in New York City?
Long Island,
Long
actually.
Island.
Yeah.
Okay. And growing up, were you an especially creative child? Did you have those inclinations early on?
Yeah, I played with Lego way too long. I was like 14, 15, still playing Lego in my bedroom and not looking to go out on dates. And you know, sure, I would have enjoyed going out on dates, but it wasn't like where I put my effort. So I feel like I was making my own comic books. I sold comics to my classmates in grade school for a nickel a comic, and my dad would Xerox them and staple them on the spine for me, because, you know, he worked in advertising, so he would use like company resources to help me and to make a printing press out of his ad agency job. You know, just kind of hustle that for me, and then I would just like go and sell them at recess and get a pile of quarters and make like $50, you know, in over the course of a year or whatever, and then have my money for the summer to buy gummy bears and comic books.
And as you got a little older, heading into high school, and then eventually making your decision about whether or not to go to college, what were you studying? What were you aiming toward at that time?
Gosh, well, it's funny. I had a guidance counselor in our high school who was a very like Eisenhower era guy with, you know, crew cut and tough and gruff and that American vibe. And he was, you know, appalled when I told him I wanted to go into animation. And he says, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, it's cartoons. It's, you know," and he says, "Well, I don't know what that is." And I said, "Well, Bugs Bunny, Mickey Mouse, I'm sure you know those." And he said, "Those are for kids." And I said, "Right, but adults make them, and there are still adults making things like that now, and I want to be one of them." And he's like, "Well, you need a backup plan. You need a plan B. You need to be an electrician, a plumber. Those are things I understand." And I said, "Well, that's great, and those are obvious occupations and opportunities for somebody, but I don't want a plan B. I don't need a plan B. I'm gonna do what I want to do, and I'm sorry that you can't help me with
He's
that.
trying to box you in with his own limited perspective.
Yeah,
I don't understand it. Therefore, you need to decide on.
Yeah, he wasn't willing to like meet me halfway there. So, but I didn't really need his advice anyway. It was like a formality that I even had to sit with him.
Sure. But that was another example of someone who's maybe going to try to take you off course a little bit, which is what we deal with, throughout life, especially early on, saying you want to do this thing, and people go, "You're what? Well, what are you going to do if it doesn't work out?" I mean, that's just it sets you up for conversation.
And that happened, and so even as I chose my school and I was going to go to the School of Visual Arts, my dad had a couple of really tenuous connections to animation, and he had heard of an animation studio or like a little mom and pop one in Manhattan, and he arranged for me to visit it with him. And I think I was in like senior year of high school, so we go there, and the guy, it's like this little rickety Manhattan office space, and with wooden floors in the hall, and there's a dumpster outside his office door and filled with folders, and we knock, and he says, "Oh yeah, we're closing down, this is the last week, it's good you came this week so I could at least shake your hand, but it's over, and animation is over, and there's no work in the city. I don't know why you want to study this, but if you want to grab a bunch of art, that whole dumpster is filled with art, so grab whatever you want, and good luck to you." So there were all these animation drawings and cells and like beautiful work done for like TV commercials that were in that dumpster. So I just grabbed a handful of them on the way out.
So they were shutting down a department at that
school? That wasn't a school. That was a mom and pop shop. Studio. It was just one of those, studios in Manhattan that had made commercials and had done animation. And my dad had heard of them and had a connection there, and we visited. And they were literally shutting down that week, and just closing down the doors, closing the shop. And there were a lot of instructors at SVA said the same thing in the early '90s when I went to school. Like, well, don't bother. There's no industry. There's no future for the animation business. Like, they tried to discourage us. And I don't mean that as like a thing that is part of the School of Visual Arts, or today that would be the vibe there, but it was definitely a downturn time in animation when things were still asleep a bit, but things were also happening. Like it was the Simpsons was a new show, Beavis and Butthead happened while I was in school. So you had MTV Animation sprung up. Jumbo Pictures was in Manhattan making Doug for Nickelodeon. Like so the creator era was beginning with two examples right there, Beavis and Doug. So it was like the cable industry was maturing and had money to spend on original animation for niche audiences. So there was a whole thing happening. Roger Rabbit and Bill Plimpton in indie animation, and Wallace and Gromit, and like things were happening all over the place. But it was easy to miss if you kind of were in a rut or something.
And as you get closer to graduating, are you thinking about your post-college life? Are you thinking of moving from home? What do you end up doing?
A friend of mine who'd worked in the industry already, he gave me some crazy advice because I had like 2 weeks to go before I graduated, and I had finished my film. And I was literally sitting at home. I had no more classes. I had a finished film on VHS tape. That's how old the story is. And he said, "Hey, you should just ring some bells. Why don't you just knock on some doors and take your film with you?" And like, what? Like, well, I should call first, right? He says, "No, just show up." And this is pre 9/11 and pre like the security world we live in today. Things were a little looser, and he gave me 3 addresses. And once I saw the studio names, like, oh, I've met a person from there, or that person was a guest speaker in one of my classes, or I saw their film at this festival. And I felt like I'd already done the homework of the 3 places he was sending me to. So I'm like, ooh, I feel like I can knock on their door because I know something about their work. And it gave me a little confidence, right? So I show up, ring the bell, no appointment, no call first, right? And go into the city to do that. And the first person's like, "Oh, sorry, none of those people are here today that you're asking about, so can't see you." And then the next person was like, I looked in the door and it was literally someone animating and on the phone. It was like a 1-person office, and I was like, oh, that person, he can't even like answer his own door. He's so busy. So, all right, that's not happening. And he just kind of waved me off. And then the third person was Michael Sporn, this indie animator who had worked for the Hubleys and had worked for Richard Williams on Raggedy Ann and Andy, a New York feature. He had this little shop, and he opened the door and he says, "Oh, I'm in the middle of a studio meeting. What do you want?" And he was a little gruff, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, but I've seen this film you just made for HBO. It really blew my mind." I started asking him questions about his latest film. And then I said, "No, I have my film with me and I'm about to graduate, but this is my only copy. And is it possible that you could watch it today and give me some feedback?" So, and I really did have like 3 more copies in my bag, my messenger bag. But I kind of, told him that was my only copy. But he was
good for you.
Yeah, I just felt
like that
I
also.
wanted to make something happen that day. I figured I'm doing this experiment. Let's make something happen. And he lets me, and he says, "Yeah, okay, come back later." And wow, really? And it was very vague. Later, all right, I guess 3 hours. So I go have lunch, and I come back, and it's later, and now his office manager lets me in, and he's on the phone, Michael Sporn. And she says, "Oh, were you here earlier? Were you the one who came by?" And I said, "Yeah." And she says, "Oh, well, he's on the phone now, but please have a seat because he's going to offer you a job." I know. I was just like, what? It was like, this can't even be, it was just mind blowing. And he did. And I started as a runner, a PA, basically, like go get art supplies, like send this art to the cameraman, the camera person, like all the things that were like back in the day of like running errands. And I did that for 2 weeks, and I worked really, really hard on every assignment in the studio when I was there. And after 2 weeks, they promoted me to a full-time animation assistant. And like, I didn't have to do runs anymore or take out the garbage or sweep the floor. Like, so they hired someone else to do that. And I was like, wow, okay, this is a miracle too. That was like the second miracle that, 2 weeks later I was able, and I got a little raise too.
So this is really your like animation school at this point in terms of just learning the pipeline, meeting people at the studio, learning what each department does.
Yeah, and over what turned out to be 2 years, it was this unbelievable paid education. I thought I had just gone to 4 years of animation school, but that was nothing. In the first 2 weeks when I was like hustling to try to show I wanted to be there, I had already learned more, I think, than the 4 years at art school. And it was mind-blowing, and it was not comfortable. Like every 3-4 weeks they would switch gears and say, "Okay, you just finished on that storyboard. Now you're going to help paint backgrounds, or now you're going to help animate, do in-betweens on someone's animation, or do your own animation with no help." And so each time I was thrown into the deep water, and it was very scary. And I would really like have a couple of rough days every time I began the next new thing, because, they needed you to be a jack of all trades at a studio like that. And that's when I first realized there are generalists in animation, and then there are specialists. And the majority of animation jobs are specialist jobs, where someone gets hired to do rigging or lighting or, viz dev, or everyone's got their lane or their specialty and their passion. But in some of these small shops, it is this, Swiss Army knife person they're looking for who can help in all different ways and just switch gears constantly. Because, you want to stay employed when you work at a small studio, because if you can only do one thing and then, we don't have a need for that one thing anymore, we'll call you in a year when we need that again. You want to just be constantly useful at a small studio.
How are you thinking about your next steps?
There was something profound happened when I was there, because I was like, wow, this is the best place I could be. There's nowhere in the world like that's going to teach me more than this. The pay wasn't gigantic, but it was definitely fair wages for the budgets they had. So I would have stayed forever, in my mind. But I noticed something. I noticed like the staff there was really always looking over their shoulder, always like, oh, is there going to be a layoff? Because a bunch of them had worked there for years or worked at other small studios for years. And they knew the reality. They knew that the layoffs happen frequently. And just a late check on a current production you're working on could send everybody home. And in fact, that happened, when I was working there. So I saw these things going on, and I thought, there's got to be some other way I could, find even more people that might be less afraid or on the wavelength that I'm looking for. Like who are the other people I need to meet that are going to make their own luck and opportunities? Because like some of the folks at the studio felt like they were very much like looking for a boss to take care of them, or like, well, let's hope the business stays healthy, or there's a lot of projects come in. Like they really were looking at it like for someone to like help make their livelihood happen, and I thought like, that doesn't seem even fair to the boss. Like, he's doing the best he can, but he's a human being, and I felt like I want to meet other people too that are taking fate into their own hands and making projects and pitching things and making films and so I started going to those ASIFA board meetings where you stick, stamps on envelopes and put a newsletter together and just kind of help this volunteer organization function. And I met people from Nickelodeon and MTV Animation and, other studios around town and people with different outlooks and different vibes. And I was like, wow, okay, this feels now like the thing I was missing. Like, I love the people I work with. I could never learn more from anybody than them. But I also now have some other heroes and some other people that are doing things in a different way, that have a different outlook. And it felt like it completed the puzzle for me. And it also gave me my next step, because when I got laid off after the 2 years, I called my friend at Nickelodeon, who I was seeing, once a month at these ASIFA meetings in a very friendly, casual way. And I said, "Oh, I just got laid off today." And she said, "Oh no, you got to come to Blue's Clues. We're going to be hiring in storyboard. You should meet the creators of the show." And the show was like only on for like 3 months. I didn't have cable. It wasn't a #1 show yet. And I thought, wow, what a generous offer. So I got on the subway and I met the creators of the show.
That Angela Santamero?
Yeah, that day it was Tracy Page Johnson, and I think I did meet Angela Santamero that day too. But my meeting was with Tracy Page Johnson and Dave Palmer, and he was the director of the animation, and she was a co-creator.
And Blue's Clues, like you said, there was no like cultural footprint yet, right? Was it just kind of another show that just seems interesting, but beyond that, you hadn't really heard of it?
Yeah, it was totally. I knew they were doing a digital pipeline, and I was just working 2 years in the last of what was like the traditional pipeline, like where we're shooting on film and editing on a Moviola or a Steenbeck and, all the optical processes and white gloves and handling cells. And it was just the traditional way of doing it, which I'm really glad I had that foundation in. But now, like, here was this digital pipeline, everyone working on computers and with this multimedia show where there's live action and art and animation mixed together. It was really exciting to learn about. And I ended up getting a storyboard test and hired about 3 months later.
How did you grow during your time on that show?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it connects back to the job right before. So as I'm on Blue's Clues and somebody leaves in storyboard, so I do get to bump up to storyboard artist within a few months. It was good timing, good circumstance. And so then I'm doing what turned out to be like 2 years of storyboarding. And pretty quickly you can really learn and master that process there, because although each script was unique and had its own challenges to figure out and sketch and thumbnail and and talk through, there was also this feeling of, I'm going to plateau. This is such a comfortable job at this point. Like, what else will I keep? Am I going to keep learning? It felt like I learned it, and I was a little bit afraid of this comfort I was feeling. And so what I thought was, I miss that flop sweat I used to have all the time of my old job at Michael Sporn, where every 2 weeks I would get a new assignment. How do I do that for myself? How do I like trick myself into still having that experience? So I thought, I should make a film. I should make my own post-student film, because I had made films as a student, like on assignment. Now I should make one for me, So I started doing that. So I go home, and every night I'm working on the film. On the weekends I'm working on the film. It took 2 years. That 2 years I was storyboarding, I've got the film done. And I finish it, and I remember bringing it into Blue's Clues and showing it to Dave Palmer in his little office and on his little video cart, and pop it in, boop, and he's like, "You just made this?" And I said, "Yeah." And he could tell the work that was put in. It was, 5-minute traditional animated film.
And was it a preschool level? Like, was it the same kind of demographic as
Yeah,
Blue's Clues?
it actually was. It was a children's story. It was like a very family-friendly children's story, because I was really in that vibe. And he said, "How come you're storyboarding here and you can animate? I mean, I didn't even know that about you." And I said, "Well, that was the opening when I came in that day, that you guys were about to hire for storyboard. And I was delighted to come in doing that, but I also animate." He says, "Oh, do you want to switch? Do you want to animate on my team?" And I thought, yeah, because I looked at his team. He had assistant animators, senior animators, and then directors under him. So it was like, gosh, there's this whole job family in his department. Whereas my department, I was already at what was close to the top of it, because it was a storyboard artist, and it felt like, I don't know what else I can do in that department. So I switched. I got the production's blessing, and I learned After Effects, their tool that they were animating in. And then I did animation, and then because they kept building the show, like we doubled production when I switched to animation. We went from making 20 episodes a year to 40.
Because it was such a
season.
Huge hit, right?
Yeah, they wanted more, so we went from 20 to 40, and then they needed to grow another team, like literally have like 2 directors working under Dave Palmer. And I, within about 9 months or something, I think they made me a director, an episode director. And I think when that happened, they looked at my background of, oh, he just made this film. He has done storyboards for us, and now he's animated for us, and he makes his own film. And I think some of those things kind of came together when that opportunity opened up, and they picked me.
And so are you also working on any personal projects during this time? Because you had made one film that really got you this great new opportunity on the show. But what about your kind of side hustles?
I'm in a building at MTV Networks where MTV is, like Viacom, MTV Networks, Nickelodeon, like all these companies overlap. And I knew the executives at MTV Animation. So I thought I should pitch something. So I remember like trying and going up to their floor a few times with an idea, a little pitch Bible. And they were really nice. And those first pitches, I really appreciate all those executives that took my pitches when I really didn't know what I was doing, and how encouraging they were, and how they gave feedback, and they had patience with how far apart I was from the reality of having, a pilot. And I did that as a side thing, and it taught me a lot. And, and it was a great way to kind of get rejection all the time, because, it just felt like, that's important too, to know how to deal with hearing no constantly. Because like the more you put yourself out there with pitches, with opportunities, the more no's you get, and you collect no's.
It's very true.
Right. So I felt like that felt good too. Because like I felt like, oh yeah, and it teaches you as a professional how to bounce back and how to take the feedback that you can apply, and like, okay, well, that was a learning experience. I didn't get it. I'm not ready yet, but there's something here I can build on.
Absolutely. No is not the end of the story. And so, and not all no's are created equal either, because there are people that are now learning a different side to you. Here's the Blue's Clues guy, but now you're pitching something to MTV, to Nickelodeon. And so there's more of you coming through to them, and you're growing your network at the same time.
Yeah.
I feel like, that great work never goes to waste, even if it
Totally.
doesn't sell. That's the ultimate goal, but it's not the only way that you could benefit from that, right?
Yep. And I was also making more independent films. I was trying to make more shorts, but I took a wrong turn. I started making shorts that were like, ooh, I think Cartoon Network might like this. And I would make a short. I'd spend 2 years on a short where I'd like, this would be my Cartoon Network show. And it was a really like unfortunate way to put your time, because I wasn't thinking about what I wanted to say, what kind of stories do I want to tell, like what styles am I interested in. I was just trying to be something I wasn't, and those were really missteps. I'm sure I learned something through the process, but it didn't lead to anything I'm proud of today, like that I would want to show you or you to know about. So there were a couple of like years in the wilderness there where I didn't understand, what I might want to say, or that I should even think about that.
When did you come to that realization that those shorts were for other people, other networks, and not yourself?
Yeah, well, one colleague at Blue's Clues, this gentleman, David Cutting, who's a great animator, he said to me, one day, and he was working under me as one of my animators. He was a senior animator, and I was his director, and we had a good relationship. And he said, Dave, can I tell you something? And I said, yeah. And he said, your first film that you made, that was like the children's film I made. He's like, that was really special. Like that really felt like you. And the new one you just made, I feel like you threw the baby out with the bathwater. And I said, oh, all right, well, thank you for telling me that. And then, I didn't want to hear that. And I was like, and I didn't get mad at him, but I kind of, it kind of sunk in, and I was like, I don't know. I think I agree with him. I don't know what to do with this though. So, years went by, and it wasn't until my mother passed away, and my what was going on? Oh yeah, my wife and I had just bought an apartment, and we were all our life was in boxes. We were going to unpack, and she and I had 10 days before my next job was going to start. I was going to direct an Adult Swim show for Cartoon Network for a studio called Clambake Animation that was in Boston that was making a show. And I was about to do that, and I had 10 days before that started. And this is like the first gap in my whole career to that point. Like felt like for a long time I hadn't ever had a day to myself. And I thought, oh, I feel so depressed. And my mom passed away like a month before, and there was so much change going on. I was going to start a new job. We had a new apartment. I lost my mom, and I just felt really low. And I said to my wife, who's had her job every day in the city, I said, "Is it okay if I don't unpack anything today? Is it okay? Is it okay? Because I feel like I need to do something for me, And I didn't know what that was, but she said, "Of course, of course." So I found this gentleman, Bob Shard, who I'd worked with at Blues Clues. He's a musician too. He had written some children's songs and I'd self-published a little CD. And I just dug that out of the closet and I played it. And there was like a 1-minute children's song on there that he did, like with acoustic guitar. And it was really happy and boppy. And I was like, oh my God, this is so sweet. And I didn't even think about the lyrics or what it was about. I just was like, I just want to live in this song. And I suddenly was smiling and feeling good. And I thought, I'm going to start drawing to this song. And I just started animating on my little Cintiq that I just got. And I made 20 seconds of a little 1-minute film that day. I just drew straight ahead. No storyboard, no notions of anything. I just knew I had 10 days. And I thought, 10 days. So there shouldn't be color. There shouldn't be backgrounds. There shouldn't be storyboards because I have no time for that. And I can make something that's a minute long in 10 days. I love that this track is telling me what the film is. And then I also didn't want to know lyric to lyric what the song was about. So I just kept playing it and stopping at 4 seconds. I'm like, it's about strawberries. I'll draw strawberries. And I drew the strawberries. And then I'm like, I wonder what's after 4 seconds. And then I play it. And now they're having pancakes in the song. Oh, okay, it's pancakes. So then I would draw the pancake moment. And I just kept having a film that was constantly transitioning to the next beat, the next moment. It was like jazz or something. And I was like, this is interesting. I wonder what this is going to be. So I finished 20 seconds and my wife comes home and I'm like, I want to show you something. I play it for her and we both start crying when we're watching it. and I think I hadn't even realized at that moment, oh, right, this is a song about a child and a parent and the parent saying, good morning, look at all the things we're going to do today. And that was, something I must have been connecting with as someone who just lost their mom, but I didn't really put it together. And then in that moment, it just kind of crashed down like, wow, yeah, that's why I've been doing this today, huh? And then I finish it in the next 9 days, and suddenly I have this film that's about something I want to say. And I didn't even fully understand what I wanted to say, but I was doing it, right? Film goes out into the world. It gets picked up by like 40 festivals. It gets into the Hiroshima International Animation Festival, which is one of the ones I always wanted to get into. It's this beautiful festival in Japan that was every 2 years. And I get in there, my wife and I go to Japan to celebrate the film at the festival, meet all these great friends that we still talk to. And the film then became a bumper that Nick Jr. played. I showed it to my friends at Nick Jr. and they like, we want to play this in rotation as an on-air promo every 4 days, 4 mornings a week. We want to open the Nickelodeon's feed with this. I'm like, great, so that they ran it. And then the film got a distributor. I still get residual checks, for this film every quarter. And it just opened my mind to like, wow, I had this tool all along, filmmaking and animation, and I could have been saying something with it, as something that I needed to say as a human being, and I wasn't doing it. And suddenly I had that thing, and I followed that ever since.
That's really, really profound. And especially how you had to, it took a tragedy like that, but to kind of turn your process around on yourself. And you had something that you really wanted to, that was just stopping you. You couldn't unpack, you could, there was just something in you that you had to work through. Mm-hmm. And it clearly touched your subconscious in a way that you weren't fully aware of, but it inspired you and it came out. Gosh. That's amazing.
Yay. Yeah. It was a special time, and gave me this feeling of, wow, like there's a real outlet here. Like there's lots of writers, creative people, artists, painters, or sculptors, or filmmakers who already know this, and I'm very late to the party.
I don't know. It takes what it takes. Do people know it? They have to find it, right?
Where it led to directly was, oh gosh, so there's other things I can make films about. It doesn't have to be like, what's Cartoon Network doing? I can make a film that will trick them into thinking it's a pitch and a pilot, and they'll want this show, So that was no longer on my radar, and I was never that guy anyway, and it was not the right fit for who my talents or whatever they are. So as I continue to make films, in New York, the next personal thing that happened is, I was lucky enough to meet my wife's grandmother, who was a really special woman. She was incredible. And so it's funny, being I think I was before we even married, and she would say, "Oh, you want to go over and see my grandma?" Like we would spend a day with her grandma in Queens, and like how many guys would be like, "Yay, let's go see your grandma in Queens," and I was like, "Yes, let's go," and it was always fun. It was always great. We played cards. We had great hamburgers from the local place. Like we talked to her. She talked about old great stories from her life, and she was this wonderful person. And I thought, wow, this is my girlfriend, then my wife's grandparents can be like this, because my grandparents, I had one on each side, my dad's mother and my mother's father. But my mother's father was a very cold, kind of hard to know, aloof, distant person, and that was like one of my main experiences with grandparents was my grandpa Herman. And when my wife's grandmother passed away, it was terrible. Like it was really a sad moment and heartbreaking, and it was really hard on my wife and hard on us. Like I was really sad too, and I just had this feeling of like, wow, like that. I'm just still thinking about her grandmother, and it at the same time I had gone back to see my dad, and I ended up just rummaging through one of their drawers, and they had my grandfather Herman, like his autograph book from high school, when he had, like, everyone was saying, good luck, Herman, and this was like in the 20s or something, and it's like this old relic. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. And I saw his like siblings in there. He had like 7 siblings I had never met. It was a really weird family, where there were different relatives that you just never met. And they were all wishing him the best, and all these messages and slang from the 20s. And I was like, this is incredible. And I was flipping through it. And then I just like decided, maybe I want to express my feeling of like, what is it like to hold something like this from a grandparent that you're so closely related to, that you grew up knowing, but you never really knew. And now you have this artifact from their life that somehow doesn't like answer that many the questions you wished it would, and it doesn't really bring you closer to that person. It just almost emphasizes the distance, or I just was thinking about all these things, and I just filmed my thumb flipping through the book with my new iPhone at the time, and I was like, and I just made a little video of like me thumbing through some of those illustrations in there, and then I started animating another layer on top of that, and in my iPhone, I just started talking about my grandfather, like, oh, he used to take his hat off when this, and I just started saying all these random memories about him. And then I ended up cutting that together, like making this soup out of it, whereas I just expressed thoughts about my grandfather. And then through this video of the book, of this autograph book, and then me animating on top of it during the film to bring those moments I'm talking about to life, but putting them on the pages of his autograph book. And I made this little film, and it got into the Tribeca Film Festival, and it played at 75 festivals around the world. And then I was like, this is crazy. Like, people are interested in this film. Like, it felt like such a personal thing, almost just for my family, but it touched people. And then made 2 more films in that tradition, where one was about how my dad came to go get a college scholarship at Cooper Union. And that was a very unlikely thing that happened in his life, because he was probably undiagnosed dyslexic and like had terrible grades and just was not really going to have a future, certainly not a big advertising career future. And that changed when he got this opportunity to get a free scholarship to college. And so I made a film about that. And then I made a film about how what that my dad, again, I picked another subject from his life, how he went to summer camp in Connecticut and how that changed his life. Getting that experience as this poor Brooklyn kid who suddenly met a whole new world in Connecticut, like as a volunteer waiter at this camp.
And when you were making those films about your dad, was he still alive at that
Yeah,
point?
and he still is now. Yeah, so he was very like moved or surprised too that I wanted to make films about these things. But they felt like big parts of our family's continuity of our story, because like I thought like, well, I grew up in a certain way, with certain opportunities because my dad had these experiences, and if these hadn't had happened to him, I wouldn't get to do what I'm doing now. And I kind of felt like wanted to honor those big moments. And I also thought like, what's wrong with so many people feel like, well, I can't talk about my family because I don't know anyone in my family that was on the Titanic. And so you're not going to be interested in what happened to them, or you're not going. My parents weren't in the Holocaust, or we always think we have to have this giant brush with history for that to be meaningful to anyone else to hear about. But I didn't think that was true. I felt like all it needs to be is an important human moment in a person's and in anyone's life, and that matters to most people.
That's really what cinema is, right? It's finding that emotional moment, that pivotal moment in that person's life. Doesn't mean it's on the Titanic, doesn't mean it's this big historical thing, but something that's big for them and amplifying it, right?
Yeah.
And making it stand out and explaining why it's meaningful. And sometimes that specificity, there's a universality to it, right? So what did your dad think of those films?
He really loved them, and he used every opportunity to like show them to his friends. And when he'd go to like a library chat, like when he was part of different things, political talks at the library, he'd go, "Oh, my son made a film," and he was just constantly like
Proud.
Yeah, very happy. And I got to bring him to like when I made the film about his college experience going to college, that got into Tribeca Film Festival too. So I got to bring him up for one of the Q&As and with me. And that was really cool to just hear him get to talk about those days and what that meant in his life.
That's really something. That's yeah. And it's a way to stay connected too, and a way to say, hey, I want to know the you before you were my dad, because parents' lives don't start when they have kids, but we kind of think that they do for the longest time until we get a little bit older, and then we increase our own awareness of life, and we go, what did my mom or dad do when they were this age, or what brought them there? And if you could just see that in their life, how special.
Yeah, and recreate that in your own, with how you think it might have looked. It kind of puts you there with them in your own way.
My now wife and I, Lucy, we went to Maine like 2 years ago to visit her sister, and my dad's from Maine, and we visited, just coincidentally, my dad's 3 sisters all live like 20 minutes from my wife's sister. Somehow my dad's from Maine, and my wife's sister married a guy from Maine, and they live there. And so I got to visit with his sisters. And of course, I was just dying to know everything about my dad at that age. What was he like? What did he get into? And that comes with just as we get a little bit older, right? Yeah.
Fantastic.
And when you're making these films, are you working at the time? Are these still side hustles, or are you making a living from doing this?
Yeah, they're side hustles. But what happened was in 5 years after these preschool shows I was directing, for my last 5 years in New York, it was all like virtual studio work. I became a virtual studio by accident. So I was making my own shorts. I was getting gigs. A Sesame Workshop gave me like 25 contracts, which were like 15 films a contract. It was like, big orders of work where I had to put like eight people together to like animate with me and deliver on all these animations they needed. So I had like a lot of repeat business from Sesame. I did a Nat Geo pilot I directed. I directed 2 shows for Cartoon Network Adult Swim through Clambake Animation. And then I did the Bob's Burgers pilot, in my Brooklyn apartment, which was, an unexpected thing, which was evolved out of just, I had been on a film jury for the School of Visual Arts, my old school. They had asked me to come back and be on a jury, and Lauren Bouchard, the creator of Bob's Burgers, was on the same jury. So we happened to meet, for a full day. We were stuck with each other on this jury, and we talked a lot, and we knew a lot of people in common. He was in Boston at the time. I was in New York, and stayed in touch. And then at one point in my virtual studio, he rings me up. He's like, "Hey, we haven't talked in a while, but I've been doing Lucy, Daughter of the Devil for Adult Swim." I'm like, "Yeah, it's a great show. I know it and love it." And he says, "Oh, I want to switch to an After Effects pipeline for that. Could you help me figure that out?" And so he gave me some consulting work where I helped test out his rigs in After Effects for Lucy, Daughter of the Devil, because he wanted to do a new season like that in a different production flow. And that didn't end up happening. He only got like a writing pickup for that season, but not the full season order. And then next thing I knew, he called me and says, "I got this pilot I'm calling it Bob's Burgers, and I need an animation shop to do it. And I liked working with you. Do you want to animate it?" And like, what a weird thing, because here's a guy who gets his big break, and he's in San Francisco by that point, and he gets this Fox pilot that he pitched and got greenlit, and he's giving it to me to create the animation for. And of course he would be fully hands-on. He had a little team in San Francisco, but I was gonna hire the animators. I was gonna animate a fourth of it myself, and I was gonna basically pre-direct all the animation, and then he would look at our dailies. Like once I gave all my notes, he looked at it and then gave his. And he was delightful to work with. He was so wonderful, and it got picked up. We worked in it for 6 weeks. It was a quick 9-minute pilot, animated in 6 weeks, and boom, done. And then picked up within months. And then he said, "Hey, are you coming to California? You want to come join that team?" And I said, "Oh, I'd love to." I said, "But what's the role? And he said, "Oh, we don't know anybody's role." That he goes, "We're going to have to figure all that out when we get here." And I said, "Oh, what's the relo? Is Fox reloading people who have to move?" "No, they're not." And I was like, "Oh, yeah." I said, "I think I'm going to stay in New York," and it wasn't because I didn't believe in him or the show. It's a fantastic show, and it was a fantastic pilot, but it just didn't feel like my opportunity to take at that point. So I stayed in New York, and then ironically, Disney hired me a couple of years later. And when they hired me, they said, "Oh, and by the way, if you take this job, you're going to have to move to LA. Do you still want it?" And I was like, "Wow. Okay." And at that point, for that opportunity, Disney was going to reload me and help us sell our apartment and help us transition to LA and find a new apartment.
Is that what finally brought you out to the West Coast?
Yeah,
Was that opportunity with Disney?
Yep.
And where did you start at Disney? Because I know that you kind of grew into your mini studio there. The same, right? What brought you out? What was the position?
It was really an interesting one, because at this point in running my virtual studio for 5 years, and I was pitching and I had a couple of projects optioned. I was selling my own ideas. I had a Disney Junior option, a Discovery Kids option, directing pilots for Nat Geo and Bob's Burgers, and so many things that were great opportunities, I felt. But this Disney one was a neat opportunity on its own, and it was working in new media. So it was working on being a creative lead for apps, basically come in, help us create a whole apps department for Disney Publishing Digital, where they were going to take advantage of the iPad, which was only a year or two old. And so all the art that they're already making when Frozen comes out, and they have this big art pool that's all digital that they use for Golden Books and for all spot art pools and all the other things it gets used for at Disney. That's all art they own that they could use in an app. So if you use that in an app, and you can make a virtual storybook with tap opportunities and games and activities, they needed someone to come in and lead the animation side of that.
And so here's another opportunity where you're working with new technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I know at that time too, Steve Jobs and Bob Iger were quite close. And so, iPad a year old, it's you have Disney. How can we maximize this or tailor it to this new device?
Yeah.
And so, had you ever worked with apps before that? Did you know what was your
only one? One of my Sesame assignments was delivering these sprites or PNG sequences for an Elmo app, and so I'd done the workflow once by that point. So I was very open with Disney, and I said, I've only touched an app once, and I have an iPhone. I don't even own an iPad. And they said, "Oh no, we think you're perfect because you can schedule, you can budget, you can write, you can direct. You're a storyteller, you're a filmmaker. You know how to set up a team. You know, you're a virtual studio runner. Like you're already working in new media in more ways than you realize. Like you're what we need. You know, so they were happy with my level of knowledge on apps. So I did have to learn, you know, as I went. But it was incredible. And I would say like there was a golden couple of years there where it was like we were inventing what, you know, the business for Disney and being very successful. Like our princess apps were exploding. Like, you know, wherever we had the perfect IP where the parents who were buying apps for their young kids, like when we had the perfect IP, like Sophia the First, or Doc McStuffins or Princess, it was a match made in heaven because our creative delivered exactly what was right for an app for that audience, for those properties. And then when we would fight it, like when we were able to get Star Wars, when that acquisition happened while I was there, and I remember we went up to Lucasfilm and met with a great woman in publishing there, and she said, "So what do you want to make in apps and for Star Wars? Like, explain this to me." And I was part of the envoy from Disney that had to convince her to say yes, right? And we were basically like, we want to make the original trilogy or all 6 movies, and then leading into the new one you're going to make. We want to make storybook deluxe versions of those. And she says, for what audience? For what age? And we were like, oh, they're going to love it. It's Star Wars. And she says, oh, will they? And she said, well, here's what I'm doing. And she showed Jedi Academy books and the Vader and Son books, the Jeffrey Brown stuff. And like, she was like, this is the stuff that's selling well. And it looks younger than what you're talking about. Like, shouldn't we do this? And we were like, no, let's do something cooler. And we fought and like we won, unfortunately. Unfortunately. Yeah. And then we made product that didn't connect with audiences. And, you know, and I still look at that as like a thing, like, wow, like here was the IP holder who was trying to tell us something. Like she and her team were interested in a different audience, you know, in something that might have fit what the audience on iPads were looking for.
So what about what you did with that IP? Did you think it didn't work? Why didn't it connect the way you thought it would?
I think because we were making products like sophisticated apps for a much older audience that wasn't using apps that way. Like the real sweet spot for us were new parents who had young kids who were like preschool age, who wanted something that looked like it was made for them. So we had this, you know, more dark, brooding artwork with like cool gadget looking design and great product, you know, like, but it was for probably a kid that was older that wasn't going to discover our app, and where parents weren't involved anymore in the purchase for their kids at that age. And probably that kid at that age was playing video games or doing something else, you know, wasn't looking for a Star Wars storybook, you know? So it's just it's an interesting thing. And I think just because you have the opportunity and the reach, or not the reach, but the opportunity to work with another line of business that you're blessed to now have, like a Disney in that case, it didn't make you. It doesn't mean you can twist that into any, you know, equation you want to, just because you think that's where it should go. Like, why not look for where it actually is? So I think we made a lot of missteps with that. And as proud as I was to be making these apps for Star Wars, because as a fan from being a young kid,
anything,
it was
like,
so exciting.
Sign me up, right?
So it was fun because later, what's fun about it is later I feel like I got to press redo on that. When I was running like a studio at Disney, when I switched departments, I had a lot more authority and control over our product and like what we would produce and develop and present. So I think we got to do it right later.
I want to make sure that we get to your transition to Pinkfong.
Yeah.
And so this happened while you were at Disney, right? Could you talk about that phone call or that initial connection with the studio?
With Pinkfong?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was later than that because I had left Disney in 2022. I switched divisions at Disney. I ended up in the YouTube side, which then evolved, which was Maker Studios at Disney. And then that evolved into Disney Plus. So that was an exciting team to kind of evolve with. And that was my last 6 years at Disney. But when I was there, I started realizing like, ooh, I'm really proud of what I'm doing here. We're making our own slate. This is exciting. But I also feel like they do reorgs every year, and we're a vulnerable department because we had 100 people in this big studio building with 3 sound stages, 40 edit suites, and my 8-person animation team was very productive and successful with our own content. But I also thought we're also part of this big machine, and like we're just going to be lumped in with the whole thing, and they're not going to want a marketing team in the social space for Disney Plus forever. They'll think, well, we can give that to an agency, and they did eventually. So while that was becoming obvious, I was open to opportunity, and I left to work at another studio to be a chief creative officer at a TikTok startup, and that was really fun. And I got to it was my first real opportunity to kind of see what I'd learned at Disney and apply it to the marketplace, because I always felt like, when you're working at Disney, it feels like you're at the biggest media empire there could be, and like that's gigantic and there's nothing can touch it. And then you realize when you leave Disney, the rest of the marketplace is even bigger. It's like but you were like in this bubble that had parks and cruise ships and theme, and movies and toys, but you realize, yeah, okay, but there's also Netflix, and there's a million other things in the world that are exciting. So it was great to play in the larger media space and take what I'd learned at Disney, which was like rapid development, scrappy ideation, and real quick to pitch, presentations. And apply that to like long form pitching for preschool. So I started doing that, through this TikTok startup, and got to sell a few things in a very tough year of 2022. But because of like any startup, that there's the downside of that is it's not stable, because to make profit from things you sell could take years and years and years. And I kind of felt like I didn't know if that level of patience was going to be there, with the company, and it kind of became clear that maybe not. They wanted like some more quicker returns on investments. But I had met Pinkfong, in a Kids Screen Summit, and they were great. And I met like 2 of their principal officers from their LA office, which was also a startup. So I met Bin Jiang and Marina Lee, and from that office, and they were great. And I just reconnected with them end of 2022, and I just kind of said, here's a snapshot of what I've been doing at Disney recently, and now as a chief creative officer, and here's my record of what I've developed and sold. And they're like, wait, this is amazing. Like, so you've been able to sell things in 2022. And they were really delighted to hear that and wanted to know my approach. Well, how do you do it? Because we're trying to do that too.
And when you reached out, were you kind of soft pitching yourself to them? Like,
it was more of like, let's reconnect and like just see where this conversation could go. Because I mean, they were so interesting, like Baby Shark and their YouTube success and what they built in 10 years was just, how could you not be in awe of that, right? Like they're really like did something like out of left field that nobody saw coming.
You just knew they were key players, and that it's just great to have a dialogue going with them.
Yeah, so I was really impressed with their work and their success and their content, everything. And yeah, so I was like, I'd love to learn more, and like we can chat, our own chat. And it was really, really great lunch, and they were like, we want to keep talking. Like, can you come back to our office and we want to talk to you about our plans and learn more about how you've developed things. So I got to show them like I had a Sony Silvergate pitch. I had my Disney presentations. I had all the things I was developing that I could kind of talk about and show my approach, personal projects too. And
like, this is my only copy, and I'm gonna
going full circle. This is my only pitch Bible. I need feedback today.
Right.
And we had a really good couple of hours in their office a week later, and at the next day I wrote a little thank you note saying that was such a great chat. Like, I would love to keep talking, or it'd be fun to figure out how to work together somewhere. And they wrote back like that day and said that was a great chat for us too. We'd love you to be our head of studio. And there was an offer letter in the email. On, like they'd already had it ready to go. And I was like really blown away. And I was like, and I know I wrote back in like within 20 minutes and accepted it and said, I'll see you in 2 weeks, and just showed up 2 weeks later.
It's incredible. Hearing all this now, I'm just struck by how many opportunities for you, or key opportunities, came from networking events, Kid Screen Summit, that ASIFA New York, right? Where that connects you with the Bob's Burgers creator, Lauren, and also how just it's that entrepreneurial spirit, but that self-generating. You're going in, showing them what you've done. You were hired as this virtual studio for so long, and also you're keenly aware of the potential for your job to end, layoffs. I mean, you dealt with that in your very first job.
Yep.
And here you are at Disney running this mini studio within the studio, doing great work, but also knowing we're not exactly safe. And so you always are like focused on what you're doing, but looking ahead, right? That's just that's just what you learn in the industry, but it never goes away, does it?
No, I feel like it's like, to me, in a weird way, keeps you young. Like, even though I can't fight time, just look at me. I'm still dealing with time like everybody else. But I think what keeps you feeling young is that sense of staying hungry and just staying motivated and interested and open and making connections and seeing opportunities. And it's really been like what I feel like every day I wake up is like another opportunity for that. And like, and what's cool when I'm paired with a great team like at Pinkfong, I see it through that lens, where it's like, wow, like, okay, ooh, if I get an inspiration, I'm excited to write it up and share it with my boss, at Pinkfong. And is this a project we could do? And it just gives me like a lens to filter through, because I think that really helps you focus creativity. When you have rules and parameters and the focus of the business that you're working in.
I think restrictions are so important for creativity. I mean, look at the short you did, Good Morning. I mean, you had a very short amount of time. You knew you couldn't paint, you couldn't add color, you couldn't do this. So here's what I could do, and you just did that, and then it came something beautiful out of it. But those restrictions, I think, what is it about restrictions? Do you think is it that it kind of erases a level of indecision because that can kind of stall a project? What do you think?
What I think, it gives you like a laser beam where okay, here's the box I'm in. I'm playing in this box, and so I have like these are the rules of the box, and then you realize all the opportunities that unlocks, versus like the blank page, which is like terrifying and scary and impossible. Like, if I could do anything, if I could develop anything, I think that was like the challenge of being an indie creator. When I would pitch and I would have success as an indie creator, but those inspirations were random, and I would think like, oh, I think this is a cool idea to do a show about a gopher that is always sick, or whatever, and you just think, is that funny? Does that work? And you just start putting some weird thing together in your head without any understanding of, is the industry looking for that? Like, what is the play pattern to that? Like, is that more of a girls or a boys show idea? Or like, where does this fit? What is the audience for it? Like the age, and what platform might be looking for something like that? Like, I want to, like, those considerations make me better as a creator now, because I can take those things and put something really personal or special, give it a POV that makes it not about data or about the things that might have informed it in the first place, but then gives it a real point of view and heart.
Yeah.
But it still benefits from all that strategy. The strategy is what helped corral you to the place you landed in, but then you bring that POV and the heart to it to make it mean something and say something.
What's been your just personal learning curve as head of studio at Pinkfong? But what has this job taught you?
Wow, that's a great question. You got me. It's a gotcha question. Yeah, what has it taught me? Oh my gosh, I feel like it definitely taught me to let go of the things that I don't have to worry about, and like the things that are like, oh, how long did deals take to make, or like, because I was used to being the driver's seat of some of those things. So if I was an indie creator, and I had a deal at Sony Silvergate, and I could negotiate that deal directly. And I had, even if I had partners, I had all that agency and decision making that I had to focus on that, and I had to learn all those things and be in the driver's seat. And realizing now, oh, that it's kind of great that I don't have to do those things, that I could just focus on the creative. And we have a great team that can focus on those other parts that are really, really important. And we have nobody better than our team who's focused there to resolve all those things and get them where they need to be. And while I want to stay informed, and I want to learn from what they've had to go through to close those deals. But it's a freedom to not have to do that, and a freedom to like just get to focus on making things and seeing where I have opportunity to help. I think like that was just a great benefit of like, I'm glad I don't have to do all of that.
But what's been that constant for you that's true now as it was true back in your first job?
What I take comfort from in terms of what change, what is the landscape comparison from when I entered the business to now is, it's like, well, what is the disruption that's happening? Because there's always been a disruption, and I love studying history, not just entertainment business history, but history in general. I'm a big history buff, and on the entertainment side of history, you could look at, what was theater originally, right? Theater was for like this upper class, experience that the average person didn't have access to theater. And then there was vaudeville. And then in the days of immigration into the United States, when there was this big floodgates of all these immigrants coming into Ellis Island and kind of then spreading out around the country and finding their way in the U.S., vaudeville then gave way to silent movies, which then made, movie theaters could play, to a cheap, an audience that had money to go to the movies. It was a very accessible thing, and they didn't even have to speak the language yet to experience those stories or those films, because it was silent movies. And but those disruptions of, vaudeville becomes the theater for the common person, and then that becomes, a big cultural touch point, and the Nickelodeons of like the little movies, the hand crank nickel film, film experiences that people had to kind of get used to what film was, and then get to see it projected big in early movie theaters, then replaced vaudeville a bit. And then the silent films, where that industry was, clobbered by talkies, and then, television, eventually, then movies had to rethink, what are we doing to keep people in the seats? There's CinemaScope, there's 3D, let's make widescreen. There were a lot of resets, a lot of recalibrations because of all these disruptions, right? Or, that happened through consumption and media. And the cable industry, was another one that just was a competitor for broadcast. And then streaming, reset it again. And then, or Netflix before that, or there was the home video, and then that died because Netflix was sending video, CDs in the mail. So like each of these things keeps kind of eating the thing that came before it. But there's always like, if you look back at any of those events, through history, it's not like, well, we stopped making films, or we stopped making stories, or, we stopped making cartoons. Like all those things survived and were reformed. And then the other thing that's amazing is, when I was a kid and I was on the floor of my basement in my family, and I was making little Super 8mm films, I remember making a little film on a Super 8 camera that no one was doing Super 8. I was lucky there was a lab that was still developing that in Manhattan, and that my school still had outdated Super 8 projectors. Which, why would they still have that? But they did in like 1990. So, I got a projector sent to my Spanish class one day, and I had my little reel of Super 8 cartoon I just made. And all of a sudden a projector comes into the room, and the Spanish teacher said, "What is this? I didn't order a projector." And I said, "Oh, I did." And then and she said, "Huh?" And I said, "Oh, I wanted to show my cartoon today. Is that okay?" And she says, "You made a cartoon?" And before I knew it, she said, "Oh, why not? Let's just play it." So it's a minute long, and I just got to play it for the class. And I'm like, that was how I could show something to my friends, to like a room full of 30 people in 1990, right? Now you upload to TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, all these great platforms where you could be seen by millions of people. Or you could develop something like Tiny Chef, like Rachel Larson and her team did, where, it could become a show on Nickelodeon like after, because you launched it yourself on your own terms first. So like that. So yeah, not only are disruptions going to keep happening and we're going to survive them, but we're also able to then make our own way better than ever before, through where we don't need that ecosystem or infrastructure that we were depending on, where we can make our own. We can get our own content out there. And all we have to be is consistent, passionate, driven, or find the right collaborators to build with. And it's so, in a sense, like these are the best times we've ever had. We just have to kind of power through it.
This is something I ask every guest. It's called the rule I break. So every industry has rules. Some are there for a reason, and some are just begging to be broken. So what's a rule in your field that you don't follow or believe in?
Wow, a rule that I don't follow or believe in. Well, for me, it was like rules of the corporate jobs I was at. So like at Disney, an example of that was you talk to this person and this. So if you want to do something for Lucasfilm, here's your handlers that you talk to, that then they talk to Lucasfilm and all that, right? So when I had just made a series for Lucasfilm, we had just made these 40 explainer videos for Star Wars, for the Star Wars Kids YouTube channel. And they were great. They were like, who are the Jedi? What's the Force? What are lightsabers? We did like a minute on each topic. And they were so cool. And as we were finishing them, I said to my producer, isn't this so sad? Like, we're done with Star Wars. Like, don't you wish we had another Star Wars show to work on? He goes, yeah, are you kidding? And I said, well, maybe we can. And he goes, well, how? And I said, well, we just worked with them directly because, that came in through the proper channels, right? Like that show. Maybe they want to do something else. Well, are we allowed to ask them? I said, it doesn't matter. Let's just ask. So that was a rule to break, like I'll ask for forgiveness, not permission. Like that's kind of how I would frame that. So long story short, we went directly to Lucasfilm and the people we had just worked with and said, what else are you looking to do? Do you want to do something else on YouTube next? And they said, yeah, actually we do. And like, we're looking for droids and we want to do like a nature show and a this and that. So we came back with like 6 pitches, a month later, and went directly to them and they said, we would do 3 of these. We would, can you budget 3 of these? And I'm like, I started budgeting them. And then they ended up, whittling down to 1, but we got to make 1. They gave us, $1 million, whatever. We made this like season 1 of a show, like a scrappy YouTube series for Star Wars kids. And my boss at Disney came to me and says, who told you you could talk to them? I said, oh, well, we were just working with them for 6 months, making that other show. And he says, well, don't you know you need to talk to that other person first? And I said, well, but we were already talking with the execs that we were working with. Doesn't Disney want to break those walls down? Don't we want to make this company smaller, not like more siloed? And he's like, well, you're going to have to talk to like the VP. So I had to go into the VP and I got a big wrist slap, like, cause like, you weren't supposed to do that. And then the irony is, we deliver season 1 of the show, and as we're making it, Target comes aboard as a partner and is like, oh, we want the show. Can we do plushies? Can we do plushies that are exclusive to Target? Can we have episodes exclusive to our broadcast system in Target? And then like activity books came on board, early reader books came on board. And then I had to make a deck. Disney then asked me, can you make a deck of the synergy you created through that show? Because we want to show it to other departments, like to show what's possible. And none of that would have been possible had I gone through the correct channels and asked for permission, because I wouldn't have gotten it. They would have said, no, they're not going to want to do something like that. But because I just circumvented it, I got to help Disney with something that they didn't even know they needed.
Before we go, I like to end every interview with a rapid fire round. So just 5 questions. First thing that comes to mind, as little as much as you want to say. What's the last book you read?
The last book I read, it's a book called Zeppo, the Reluctant Marx Brother. I think that's the title. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
It was very cool to hear the Zeppo side of the story.
Right. That's a great title. It tells you everything that it's going to be.
Yeah.
What's a movie you love rewatching?
Oh gosh, probably Planet of the Apes I'm going to give you two answers to that. Planet of the Apes, because I just think everything about it. It's groundbreaking, the makeup, the storytelling, the mirror to society. I just eat it up. And then The Devil Wears Prada is a movie that when that used to come on when I still had cable before I don't. And Devil Wears Prada's on again. I got to sit down and watch that again. I just thought it was a perfection.
If it wasn't this, what's another career field you could see yourself in?
Oh, and I love to tinker with songs. I love to like write songs, even though I don't really play music. I always hear melodies in my head. And now I'm getting to help create songs at Pinkfong, through a new project we're working on. So I think, some kind of like music or a song-based career would have been interesting, but I really don't have the skills for it.
Worst piece of advice you've ever received?
Wow. Worst piece of advice. Oh, well, this is another, I don't know if it's advice, but it's like at Disney when I showed, I had met a person who was like the VP of international marketing at Disney Feature, and Wreck-It Ralph, Ralph Breaks the Internet, the sequel was about to come out, and this gentleman was marketing the film worldwide, right? And he was part of the partnerships with Ralph and like all like the different retail partnerships too, and trying to make content that could celebrate each of those partnerships. So I went to him with my Disney team reel, and I just had a coffee with him in his office, and I didn't ask permission again. And I just like said, I want to show you the things. We just made this for Google Home device. We just made this for pull-ups. I did like some card stuff, some Mickey stuff. And I was just showing it to him, and he says, "You made this in Glendale? You did?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "This is great." And he says, "Can you make something for me?" And I said, "Wow, what do you got?" And he goes, I need a Wreck-It Ralph short that connects with Bape, which is this like Japanese high-end clothing brand. It's BAPE. And we want to celebrate the collaboration between the two. Can you animate that? Can you pitch us a story? And I'm like, wow. So I go back to my leader at Disney and I tell her about this, and she says, "Oh, well, we don't really like going around the company and looking for charity." But she kind of framed it as like, that's what you're going to hear from like our big boss when he hears about this. Like, it wasn't like it was really her opinion, but she just wanted me to know how this was going to be received. And I said, "Oh, no worry there, because there was no charity here. This is based on the work that we've been doing. I showed the work we've been doing, and they wanted to give us more. So that's not really charity. That's like building on our own success." And so I just looked at it as like, this is not helpful to me.
No.
And I'm just going to ignore this. And we got to make the short.
And finally, the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh, I'll tell you that. I think it might have been recently. I was having lunch with Diana Lansleen, who's an actress and a producer and a voice artist. And we were talking about notes and the creative process, and like all the notes that I get too as like a head of studio when I'm shaping something. And she says, "Dave, do you know what notes really are? Like when you get notes from someone, you know what that really means? It means that they have the faith in you that you can execute them and that you can deliver, and that you can take these notes and make something even better with them. Like that's their trust. Like when they give you notes, that's a belief that you can do it, and that it's, like she told me to look at it like that. And I was like, wow, like I just never thought of notes that way. And I've always been like, oh yeah, I work with notes as part of being a professional in the industry for, decades. And like, I know what notes are, but when she said that just like flipped a switch in my brain that needed to be flipped.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard it framed that way. And I like that very much.
Yeah, me too.
Before we go, where can people find you or learn about your work?
You mentioned my book earlier, so my book is still on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. It's Your Career in Animation, How to Survive and Thrive, and it's published by Skyhorse Press. And so if you want to learn more, there's a lot of stuff in the book. And Also LinkedIn. So just look me up, David Levy and Pinkfong, head of studio, LinkedIn, and I'd love to connect with anyone interested out there, because I do coffees and hellos and correspondence with new people every week, and I feel like it's part of my commitment to like helping others in the field, that we're all in this together, and there's people at all levels and all stages of their career that reach out, and I want to hear from all of them.
This was such a pleasure, and thank you for coming in and sharing your story.
My pleasure. Thanks, Brandon. Thanks for having me.